Architects and building engineers are endlessly refining the technology of construction. But man's penchant for erecting large structures has resulted in the development of another engineering skill: building demolition by implosion. For nearly a century, with some strategically placed charges and the push of a plunger, building after building has collapsed on cue.
An implosion of a building is a more efficient function, a proper way of doing it. When you do the hammer and ball, it takes a great deal of time, and it can be very sloppy. A controlled implosion usually uses the laws of physics. So it's a controlled explosion, and the building comes down in one big heap, and you can usually just truck out the material.
The term implosion is often used, but scientifically speaking, it's not an implosion, but rather a set of carefully planned explosions that cause the building to fall in on itself. Generally, to bring down a building, blasters will explode the major support columns on the lower floors first, and a few of the upper stories in taller buildings. Different explosives are used for different materials. When done properly, it's the safest and fastest way to level a multi-story structure. But in May of 1989, one building refused to be brought to its knees. In Providence, Rhode Island, a 10-story public housing structure stood its ground, not only once, but for a second time. It was a most curious sort of engineering disaster. A local company, Bill Ray Demolition, was in charge and brought in New York implosion specialists to bring down the building as part of a multi-million-dollar modernization of the area. The buildings in the housing project to be destroyed were built in the 50s, and to the original architect's credit, turned out to be sturdier than expected.
The buildings were constructed with poured concrete and rebar using a honeycomb design, which sort of reinforced themselves.
As the demolition team prepared the building, excitement built in Providence.
And in preparing the building, because they drilled thousands of holes in the first and second floor, took out doors and windows that existed and drilled these holes, and connecting with the detonation cord, they put in around 1/4 pound of dynamite.
650 pounds of explosives were embedded in the steel-reinforced concrete on the first and second floors that provided support for the T-shaped structure. Early on the morning of May 21st, a warning horn sounded, and a few minutes later, at 8:30 a.m., the plunger was pushed.
There was a huge explosion, rocked the general area, and a big cloud of smoke came up that engulfed the entire building. The only thing I remember seeing is 2 seagulls on the roof of this 10-story high-rise. They remained in sight throughout the implosion. Then we noticed that the building hadn't even moved.
It was kind of embarrassing to both the explosive company and my father's company, because, you know, we're out there experienced in this field, and we do it every day of our lives, and all of a sudden, failure just happens in front of you, in front of your eyes. And it was just embarrassing.
Well, after the first demolition implosion failed, we conducted a planning meeting with all the public safety officials and the implosion specialists, and determined that what was holding the building up was the heavy end stairwells for the building.
After setting new charges in the stairwells, at 1:30 p.m. the plunger came down a second time.
And when that second charge went off and that building started to fall, you had the excitement thinking it was going to go. And then all of a sudden it just got bound up between each other and stood there.
Well, there seemed to be a great deal of laughter from the crowd, a great deal of befuddlement on behalf of the staff and the project managers. We were very disappointed.
The building had fallen about 30 feet and was leaning at a 20-degree angle.
You had a 10-story high-rise leaning towards the public streets. So it was a disaster. It was quite scary, actually. They knew at that point that a third set of charges wouldn't work because of the way the structure was now collapsed and leaning into each other. There was no way for it to fall. So they started voicing their other options, and that's when they had meetings and came to the conclusion that it had to come down with a wrecking ball.
What was supposed to take seconds now was going to take several weeks. Streets had to stay closed and homes and businesses evacuated until the remains of the leaning building were deemed safe. Slowly, the building was pounded into submission without further incident. But the failed implosion was the talk of the town.
Well, in good American spirit, entrepreneurial spirit, we tried to make lemonade with the lemons, even though they were sour lemons. What happened is a number of people were taking photographs, and someone talked about the Tower of Pisa, so we said, now we have the Leaning Tower of Providence. So we made some T-shirts up and actually made some money on the event.
Today, there are a series of low-rise public housing units where the Leaning Tower of Providence defiantly once stood.